The United States survived a second war with Britain in 1812. Coming out of that conflict, a massive wave of nationalism swept across the surviving states, creating a surge of optimism that became known as the Era of Good Feelings. Politicians in Washington capitalized on this momentum to aggressively centralize the nation's finances and infrastructure. They chartered a second bank of the United States to issue a single national currency, and Congress funded a major east-west highway called the National Road to legally and physically bind the states together. They even projected this newfound confidence outward. In 1823, President James Monroe issued a formal doctrine declaring that the United States would oppose any European interference in the Americas. But as the country expanded westward, a severe structural flaw began to surface. Every time a new territory applied for statehood, it threatened to upset the delicate one-to-one balance of voting power in the U.S. Senate between free states and slaveholding states. While the federal government was busy designing a single, unified empire on paper, its citizens were physically constructing two entirely incompatible societies on the ground. In the North, the economy rapidly industrialized. Between 1815 and 1860, businesses built large-scale manufacturing centers, powered by complex machines and the cheap labor of millions of new immigrants arriving in crowded eastern cities. To move these goods, local governments and private businesses built vast networks of canals and early railroads, connecting eastern manufacturers with a booming nationwide market. Down south, the landscape looked completely different. The southern states lagged far behind in industrial infrastructure, opting instead for a sprawling agricultural economy entirely reliant on massive cash crops. By 1793, Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, a machine that efficiently separated sticky seeds from raw cotton bolls, supercharged this agrarian system. By 1860, Southern cotton accounted for nearly two-thirds of all United States exports. Because planting and harvesting was incredibly labor-intensive, spreading cotton plantations triggered a horrific exponential increase in demand for enslaved African Americans. These two economic engines were immensely profitable, but they required completely opposing labor structures to function. The North needed a mobile, wage-earning workforce, while the South built its entire wealth on human bondage. These two systems violently collided in 1819, when Missouri applied for statehood as a slaveholding state. Suddenly, the nation had to explicitly decide whether the institution of slavery would be permitted to expand into the West. To avoid a political meltdown, lawmakers engineered the Missouri Compromise of 1820. This map lays out the deal. Maine entered as a free state, Missouri as a slave state, and a strict border was drawn across the Louisiana Purchase, dictating where slavery was banned. Soon after, the presidency of Andrew Jackson further stressed the fragile relationship between the states and the central government. Jackson built his power on rural, small-town populism, actively dismantling federal institutions like the National Bank. Jackson's aggressive style met a major test during the nullification crisis. When Congress passed tariffs designed to protect northern factories, South Carolina argued the taxes economically damaged the South and threatened secession. Jackson had to send a warship to Charleston just to enforce the law. Jackson used federal power to relentlessly clear land for Southern agriculture. He signed the Indian Removal Act, forcibly marching Native Americans off their ancestral lands. Roughly 4,000 Cherokee died of starvation, disease, and exposure on what became known as the Trail of Tears. Federal legislation was failing to hold the country together. Instead, it was actively sparking constitutional crises and driving humanitarian atrocities in the name of expansion. Seeing their political system buckle, everyday citizens stepped outside of the government entirely to force social reform. Groups mobilized to target the ugliest side effects of rapid industrialization. Factory workers formed early labor unions to protest grueling 12-hour shifts, while temperance organizers preached across the country to combat widespread alcohol consumption. Activists also challenged strict social hierarchies. In 1848, organizers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton held the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, officially launching a nationwide movement to secure voting rights for women. But of all the reform efforts of the era, the most polarizing was abolitionism. These activists were uncompromising, demanding an immediate and absolute end to the institution of slavery. Free and formerly enslaved African Americans like Frederick Douglass took the lead. Through deeply personal testimony, they forced the white Northern public to confront the everyday brutality required to sustain the Southern economy. These grassroots movements stripped away the polite political compromises of previous decades. They forced Americans to look closely at their country and realize that its founding ideals simply could not coexist with its economic reality. By the eve of the 1860s, the United States was vastly larger and wildly wealthier than anyone could have predicted 50 years earlier.
It was also irrevocably fractured. The post-war dream of engineering a single, unified American identity had shattered. In its place stood two deeply entrenched regional powers, staring each other down with mounting hostility. The very mechanisms that built America's massive prosperity, the industrial boom in the North and the enslaved cotton empire in the South, were exactly what made a civil war unavoidable.